Mendelow's matrix, a tool for treating stakeholders unequally and being explicit about why. 1981. Aubrey Mendelow, at the Second International Conference on Information Systems in Cambridge, Massachusetts, proposed the power-interest matrix that has since entered every textbook in strategic management. 2 axes. Power on one, interest on the other. 4 quadrants. The matrix does what Freeman's list cannot do. It forces a board to prioritize, in language the board can defend, while keeping every stakeholder in view. The 4 quadrants: low power, low interest, minimal effort. A stakeholder who cannot move and does not much care. High power, low interest, keep satisfied. The holder who could block you but has no active view. Low power, high interest, keep informed. The advocate whose voice does not yet carry, but whose reach could grow. High power, high interest, key players. The group who hold the agenda. One refinement worth holding. Mendelow's interest axis measures institutional concern with the strategy. For regulators, that is their statutory mandate, always high. For political bodies, it is the priorities of the day, genuinely variable. For institutional investors, it is whether they hold the stock by active conviction or by index weight. 2 stakeholders in the same quadrant can be working the strategy at very different intensities. Hold that distinction in the back of your mind for the case. 2 observations before the case. First, the matrix is a snapshot. Stakeholders move between quadrants in response to events, and the board that stops refreshing the map stops seeing the room. Second, power is not a single thing. Mendelow's power is structural. Control over resources, voting rights, regulatory authority. It is not the power to persuade. The political philosopher Stephen Lukes, writing in 1974, synthesized earlier work by Robert Dahl and by Bachrach and Baratz to name 3 faces of power: decision power, agenda-setting power, the power to shape what gets seen as an issue at all. Mendelow's matrix captures the first face cleanly. It captures the second only partially. It does not capture the third. A board working with the matrix as its only stakeholder lens will miss the moment when an issue becomes thinkable for the first time. That gap will matter in the case that follows. Here is the argument the rest of this note will make. The matrix itself is not the trap. The annual board offsite that plots it once and revisits it 12 months later is the trap. Used to plot today, the matrix gives a board a defensible prioritization. Used as a static artifact the board returns to once a year, it teaches the board to read change late. Both BP under Alkenkloss and BlackRock under Larry Fink show the matrix in motion. One organization read the trajectory, the other read only the snapshot. First, the case the matrix is being tested against. BP under Murray Auchincloss, plotted twice, once in February 2020 and again in February 2025. February 2020. Bernard Looney has just committed BP to net zero by 2050. The key players quadrant is crowded. The major index-weighted holders, Legal and General, Vanguard, Norges Bank, sit there. So does BP's own board. So do the European regulators, whose statutory mandate makes them high interest by definition. Same quadrant, very different active engagement. Legal and General and Norges Bank are pressing the transition pledge directly. The EU regulators in 2020 are drafting sector-wide rules, the Green Deal, the taxonomy, that will reach BP later, but they are not engaging the company specifically. Keep satisfied, the UK government focused on Brexit completion and the early COVID response. Low active interest in BP's strategy in 2020. Sovereign wealth fund holders, indexed but passive. Keep informed, Client Earth follow this. Transition-aligned NGOs, student activist organisations, high active engagement, low power. Minimal effort, retail holders, short cycle hedge funds, uninterested in a 15-year thesis. The map sorts the room. The energy in the room sits in 2 quadrants at once. February 2025. The matrix has redrawn itself in 2 directions at once. The redraw was a year in the making. Bluebell Capital Partners had written publicly to BP's chair, Helge Lund, in January 2024, demanding the company halt its transition, cut renewable spend, and return capital. Bluebell's stake was small. Their letter was the campaign's opening shot. Elliott management arrived later and heavier. Elliott has taken a stake reported at around 5% and become a key player overnight. The European regulators remain in the key players quadrant, but their active engagement has changed. By 2025, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is in force. The Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive has passed. The EU sustainability disclosure machinery is now actively reviewing BP's filings, rather than drafting rules in the abstract. Same quadrant, materially more engagement. Simultaneously, the climate-aligned index holders have moved down the power axis, not because their shareholding shrank, because the new strategic story is no longer written in a language their stewardship teams can defend internally to their own beneficiaries. Follow This has moved up the interest axis but remains low on power. The retail holder segment has become quietly more powerful through proxy aggregation. The UK government, under the Labour administration that took office in July 2024, has become a higher interest actor, though not on Mendelow's axis, yet a higher power one. A government moves up the power axis through three instruments: the threat of a windfall tax, a change to licensing conditions on oil and gas blocks, regulatory friction applied to pipeline or port infrastructure. Labour has so far used none of the three. That is why it sits high on interest and still middling on power. Two maps, same company, 5 years apart. No stakeholder has left the room. Each has moved. What Mendelow's matrix adds to Freeman's list is this: Auchincloss could read the 2025 map and know that acting against the pledge would cost him less from the current key player set than holding to the pledge would cost him from Elliott. That is not a moral claim. It is a readable one. The matrix let the decision be read. The critique that holds, and that this note exists to teach. The matrix treats power and interest as independent. Empirically, they are not. Interest without power tends to acquire power, through proxies, through coalitions, through regulators. A climate-aligned group Keep Informed in 2020 can become a key player by 2030 through a single legislative act, a single court ruling, or a single index methodology change. The matrix also doesn't tell you which of these stakeholders is actually working the strategy right now. Two key players in the same quadrant can spend the year on very different things. Mendelow gives you a static sort. Active engagement is a separate question the matrix does not answer. The board that reads the snapshot misses the trajectory. The board that reads only the trajectory will fail to act on the present. Both readings are necessary. Most boards do only the first. The positive contrast that makes the trajectory point legible. BlackRock Inc., the world's largest asset manager. Larry Fink's annual letters to chief executives beginning in 2018 are read in this note as a public worked example of a stewardship team that maps the matrix and the trajectory at the same time. The 2018 letter set the marker, asking every BlackRock-held company what its long-term social purpose was. The 2020 letter named climate as a defining factor. The 2022 letter, often misread as a retreat, was actually a re-weighting. BlackRock had read the trajectory of the political backlash in the United States, the rise of anti-ESG state pension exits, the legal and regulatory exposure of stewardship voting, and repositioned. Not by abandoning climate-aligned investing, by remapping who held the power and the interest in setting the boundaries of stewardship itself. The 2023 and 2024 letters refined the reading further. Whatever you make of BlackRock's substantive choices, the discipline of public stewardship trajectory mapping, year on year on the record, is the cleanest worked example in 21st century capital markets of what Mendelow's matrix looks like when it is used dynamically rather than statically. The matrix is a tool. The discipline is the practice. 2. The harder critique that senior practitioners should hold. The matrix can entrench bias. Power, defined structurally, is the power the existing system has already legitimized. A stakeholder whose claim does not yet have institutional standing, indigenous communities affected by a pipeline, future generations affected by emissions, communities affected by displacement during a transition, will sit forever in low power quadrants until the structural rules change. The matrix tells you nothing about whether they should be there. It tells you only that today they are. A board that uses the matrix as a prioritization oracle, without asking the meta question, who is in the low power quadrant, because the structure put them there, has used the tool to ratify the existing distribution of power rather than to contest it. Mendelow does not do that work. Freeman, in the previous note, gives part of the answer. Stakeholder theory's normative branch tells the board that some claims carry moral weight, regardless of structural power. The two frameworks together, normative grounding plus structural mapping, produce a more honest tool than either alone. As of April 2026, BP's matrix will redraw itself again at the 2027 proxy season. The question is not whether it moves, it is which way and who moves it. Helge Lund's chair succession will reshape the board's own position in the matrix. The new Labour government's regulatory choices will shift the UK government's location. The interest rate cycle will reshape the index holder coalition. None of these are predictions. They are the variables a Mendelow disciplined board would already be tracking. 3 things to carry forward. A reading. Aubrey Mendelow's original 1981 conference paper, if you can find it. More practically, the treatment in Johnson, Scholes and Whittington's Exploring Corporate Strategy, which is where most boards first meet the tool. Pair it with R. Edward Freeman, Strategic Management, 1984. Stakeholder theory sets out the list. The matrix without the list can mislead. Stephen Luke's Power, A Radical View, 1974, for the deeper account of what power actually is and where the matrix's structural reading falls short. And, for the worked example of the matrix in motion, Larry Fink's annual chief executive letters from 2018 onwards, which BlackRock publishes openly on its corporate site. A question. Plot your own matrix for your organisation today and 5 years ago. Who has moved? Who has moved furthest? Who did you miss moving? And harder, who is in the low power quadrant because the structure has put them there, rather than because their claim is small? And the wider library. Freeman tells you who is in the room. Mendelow tells you how much weight each holds and how engaged they are. Agency and stewardship theory in the next note tell you how the board is governing the room. Section 172 of the Companies Act, in the Ethics Room's Note 2, is the statutory duty through which the stakeholder regard the matrix ways is actually translated into director conduct. Each lens answers a different question about the same set of claims. Curated by Matthew Doyle, Made Partners.